After my husband died, his brother offered to help manage the estate. I trusted him. 3 months later, the house was sold, my accounts were locked, and my son's college fund was empty. "You weren't legally married long enough to matter," he said. I found a folder in the basement that night. Inside was a letter my husband had written but never sent. "My name is Rachel. I'm 34, I live in Bozeman, Montana, and this story starts the day my husband David died." David was the kind of man people liked right away. He was steady, calm, smart, and had a dry sense of humor that would sneak up on you. He wasn't flashy. He was just good. The kind of good that didn't try too hard. We'd been married just over 2 years when it happened. It was a Tuesday afternoon. He was home early from work, playing with our son Jake, trying to make him laugh. Jake had just turned 10 months old and was obsessed with making sounds. He was sitting on the living room rug, banging a plastic spoon against a box. David sat down in the recliner, said he felt lightheaded, and then, just like that, he slumped over and stopped moving. I thought he was joking. I even laughed a little. Then I saw his mouth hanging open, eyes blank. I called 911, tried CPR, screamed at the dispatcher when they asked me if I was sure he wasn't breathing. I knew he was gone before the ambulance even got to our driveway. The doctor said it was a brain aneurysm. Sudden. No warning. Nothing anyone could have done. I don't remember much from the days after that. I was in shock. My body functioned, but my brain didn't. People came and went. They brought food I didn't eat. They sent flowers I never opened. I barely slept. I didn't want to talk to anyone, not even my parents. I sat in Jake's room at night, holding him, telling him over and over, "Daddy's gone." He didn't understand. He just looked at me and babbled like everything was still fine. At the funeral, David's brother Mark showed up in a black suit and expensive shoes. His hair was slicked back, and he had that plastic smile on his face like he was posing for a photo. I had never liked Mark. He was always fake. Too smooth. Like a used car salesman in a courtroom. David didn't trust him either. They only saw each other maybe once or twice a year. But Mark acted like they were best friends. Hugged me like he meant it. Kept saying how much he loved his little brother and how he was going to take care of us. At the time, I was too numb to care. I let him help with the paperwork. He said he had a law degree. Told me not to worry about anything. That he'd help me sort out David's accounts, the house, the life insurance, the will, all the legal stuff, he called it. I said thank you and went back to surviving day by day. I should have looked closer. I should have asked more questions. But I didn't. I trusted him because I was broken, and he sounded confident. A few weeks later, I noticed our joint bank account wasn't showing up in the app. Then my debit card stopped working at the grocery store. I thought maybe the bank was updating something. I called, and they told me the accounts had been closed and funds transferred under new legal directives. That didn't make sense. I hadn't signed anything. So I drove straight to Mark's office. He didn't seem surprised to see me. Just leaned back in his chair and said, "You should have called first, Rachel." I asked him what was going on. Where our money went. Why the house deed was missing from my safe. He didn't flinch. David never updated his will. You guys were married less than 3 years. Under state law, you don't qualify for full inheritance. I'm the legal next of kin. I'm sorry, it's not personal. I stood there, stunned. What about our son? What about Jake? Your son gets a portion in a trust, he said, tapping some papers. But you, personally? Not much. That's just the way it works. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. He would never do that, I said. He loved us. He would never leave us with nothing. Mark looked me straight in the eye and said, maybe he meant to fix it, but he didn't. That's on him. Then he told me the house was already in escrow, and the accounts were being redistributed. If I had questions, I should talk to a lawyer. But it wouldn't help, he added, because I've got the legal documents. I walked out shaking. Not angry yet. Just confused. It didn't make sense. David was organized. He had lists for everything. He updated our car insurance twice a year. There's no way he wouldn't have prepared for this. I went home. Put Jake down for a nap. Sat in the living room and stared at the empty recliner for an hour. Then something clicked. David had a system. He kept everything. Old receipts, tax files, letters. If he had done something about the estate, it would be somewhere. That night, I went into the basement. I hadn't been down there since the day he died. David used to spend hours there, cleaning his tools, fixing stuff, labeling boxes. He had a metal file cabinet hidden behind the old water heater. I remembered seeing it once when he was rearranging things. I found the key taped under one of his tool drawers. Inside the cabinet were several folders. One labeled taxes. One labeled insurance. Then, near the back, I saw it, a red folder, labeled in thick marker, "If anything happens to me." My hand started shaking. I opened it. There was a single letter inside. Dated 6 months earlier. It was in David's handwriting. "Rachel, if you're reading this, then something happened and I didn't get the chance to update the will properly. I've been meaning to. I've just been putting it off. I don't trust Mark. You know that. He's dangerous when it comes to money. If I die and he gets involved, you need to act fast. I already moved most of our assets into a joint trust with your name on it. The documents are in the safe in my office. Code is our anniversary. Call Steve Lansing at the DA's office. He helped me last year when Mark tried to take from Dad's estate. Steve knows what to do. Don't let Mark get away with anything. I love you. Keep Jake safe." I read that letter over and over again. My heart felt like it was going to explode. The next day, I went to David's office downtown. His assistant still worked there and let me in. The safe was behind his desk. I punched in our wedding anniversary, March 14th, and it clicked open. Inside were folders with signed documents showing the joint trust in my name. The house. The accounts. Even a secondary insurance policy I hadn't known about. All legally binding. All notarized. All time-stamped before he died. I took them straight to Steve Lansing. He remembered David. Told me they'd been preparing a case against Mark years ago but never had enough evidence. But this? This was solid. Steve told me to leave everything with him. That I'd done the right thing. Within 2 weeks, a full investigation opened. The banks froze all transfers from David's accounts. They found over $300,000 siphoned into a fake LLC Mark had created overseas. He'd forged my signature on at least 2 documents. He'd submitted a fake version of David's will, one that wasn't even notarized correctly. A month later, Mark was arrested at his office. I didn't see it happen, but I got a phone call. A woman I barely knew from town left me a voicemail. "Rachel. You didn't hear this from me, but Mark just got hauled out of his office in handcuffs." He cried. Like, full-on sobbed. "I thought you'd want to know." I sat on my porch that night with a glass of wine and watched the sunset. For the first time since David died, I actually felt something that wasn't grief. I felt peace. But it wasn't over. I thought that was it. I thought Mark going to jail was the end of it. But when you deal with someone like him, it's never over that easy. The charges against Mark were serious. Fraud. Forgery. Embezzlement. There was talk of a potential 10-year sentence. Steve Lansing told me the DA's office was pushing for the maximum because of how personal and deliberate the theft was, robbing a grieving widow and child. People in town were shocked. Everyone had seen Mark as the successful older brother, the one who drove the nice car and gave legal advice at charity events. Turns out, it was all stolen. The trial was set for early March. Until then, Mark was out on bail. I didn't like that, but I was told it was standard. He had no prior record. Still, something about it made my skin crawl. And I was right to be nervous. A week after he got out on bail, I started noticing things. The first time, it was just a light on in my garage that I swore I hadn't left on. Then my trash bins were pushed back into the middle of my driveway one morning. It wasn't the wind, there hadn't been any that night. My neighbor across the street, Mr. Langley, told me he saw a car idling outside my house around 2 a.m. A black sedan. Lights off. That same week, I started getting phone calls. Blocked numbers. No one on the other end. Just silence, or breathing, and then a click. At first I thought I was imagining it. That maybe I was just on edge. Grief makes you paranoid. Trauma makes you doubt yourself. Then someone left a letter in my mailbox. No stamp. No return address. All it said was, "You think you've won. You have no idea what you've started." I took it straight to the police. They filed a report but told me there wasn't much they could do unless there was a direct threat. Steve was furious when I showed him. He called the judge and asked for Mark's bail to be revoked, but the judge said unless we had proof he'd sent the letter, it didn't count. I knew it was him. He was trying to scare me. To make me back down before the trial. Then, out of nowhere, I got served. Mark's lawyer filed a civil lawsuit against me for emotional damages and defamation, claiming that I'd lied about the trust documents and ruined his reputation in the community. He demanded $200,000 in damages. I couldn't believe it. I sat on the floor in my kitchen just staring at the papers, wondering how a man could steal from me, threaten me, try to erase my husband's legacy, and still try to turn himself into the victim. I called Steve. He told me not to panic. That it was a stunt. A move to intimidate me or delay the criminal case. But he said something else too. "This is how men like Mark operate," he said. "They don't care about facts. They care about control. The moment you stop being quiet, they go on offense." So I didn't back down. I got my own lawyer. A woman named Jennifer MacArthur. She wasn't flashy. Didn't do much small talk. But she was sharp. She filed a countersuit within 48 hours and submitted the trust documents, the notarized signatures, David's letter, and even photos of the forged ones Mark had tried to sneak into probate court. Still, the pressure was real. The fear was real. Some nights I slept with the baby monitor in one hand and a kitchen knife under my pillow. I had a security system installed. Got cameras for the front and backyard. Then came the worst day of all. It was early January. Snow everywhere. I was coming home from the grocery store, carrying Jake on my hip. As I got to the door, I noticed the keypad on the security system had been ripped off the wall. I froze. My hands started shaking. I backed up slowly and got into the car, locked the doors, and called the police. They found the back door unlocked. Mud prints on the floor. My bedroom drawers were open. Someone had gone through my clothes, my jewelry box. They didn't take much. Just a few personal items. But they left something behind. Another letter. This one taped to my bathroom mirror. It said, "You don't know what David was hiding. Keep digging and you'll regret it." That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. I was past that point. I went back down to the basement. Back to the filing cabinet. I dug through every folder, every box, every file David had left behind. And that's when I found it, tucked behind a loose piece of wood in the cabinet's bottom drawer. A flash drive. There was no label. Just the drive. I brought it upstairs and plugged it into my laptop. There were 3 files. 2 were PDFs, scans of bank transactions and emails between Mark and someone named P. Avery. The 3rd was a video. It was David. Filmed from his phone. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept. If you're watching this, Rachel, then I didn't make it. And I'm sorry. I've been trying to fix this without scaring you, but I think Mark's doing something bigger. I found out he's been laundering money through a shell company in Wyoming. I confronted him once. He laughed in my face. Said no one would believe me because I didn't have the guts to go public. But I made backups. I gave copies to Steve, and I'm keeping this one in case something happens to me. Please be careful. Don't trust anyone around him. He doesn't care who he hurts. He only cares about getting what he thinks he deserves. That was the moment I knew David hadn't just feared Mark would screw me over. He'd been trying to stop something criminal, something dangerous, long before he died. And now it was up to me to finish what he started. I called Steve again. Told him everything. Sent him the drive. When he saw what was on it, he went silent. Then he said, "This just turned federal." After I gave Steve the flash drive, things moved fast. Faster than I expected. He contacted someone at the FBI. I don't know the exact details, and he didn't give me names, only said this was now a joint investigation. The drive David had hidden wasn't just proof of theft. It pointed to something bigger. Mark wasn't just stealing from David. He was part of a larger scheme. One involving wire fraud, shell corporations, and dirty money being funneled through real estate deals across 3 different states. That's why he'd gone so far to keep me quiet. That's why he broke into my house. And that's why he was willing to risk everything, even filing that lawsuit against me. Because if the rest came out, he wouldn't just go to prison. He'd lose everything. His reputation, his assets, his freedom. Steve said the video David recorded was damning. But even more important were the transaction logs. Mark had used David's identity in several of the wire transfers. That changed things. It wasn't just fraud now, it was identity theft, money laundering, and possibly conspiracy. They froze all of Mark's business accounts. I got a call a few days later from a woman in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Her name was Lisa. She ran a title company and had just found out that her name had been tied to a shell business connected to Mark. She was panicked. She thought she was going to lose her job. She wanted to know how I was involved. I wasn't. But I started to understand just how far this web reached. The FBI asked me to wear a wire. I nearly choked when they said it. I told them I wasn't some undercover agent, I was a single mom who could barely sleep at night. But they said Mark was getting desperate. They had reason to believe he'd try to make contact again before the trial. And they were right. Because the very next night, he showed up at my house. I'll never forget that knock. It was around 9:30 p.m. Jake was asleep. I was watching TV with the volume low. At first I thought it was the wind. Then I heard it again. 3 slow knocks. I looked through the peephole, and there he was. Mark. No suit this time. Just jeans, a jacket, and a look on his face I hadn't seen before. He looked sweaty. Nervous. Angry. I didn't open the door. I just flipped on the porch light and said, "Go away." He didn't leave. "Rachel," he said, loud enough to be heard through the door. "You need to stop. You don't know what you're doing." I said nothing. "You think this is about the house? The money? It's bigger than that. You're going to ruin things for a lot of people. People who don't forget." That was the moment I realized he wasn't acting alone. He'd never been. This wasn't just about a greedy brother. It was something darker. More dangerous. I called Steve. The FBI pulled my phone records and confirmed the visit. But they told me not to engage again. They were preparing charges, and they were trying to connect the dots to at least 3 others involved in the larger scam. Meanwhile, Mark's lawsuit was thrown out. His lawyer dropped him. His assets were being dismantled piece by piece. But there was one last twist I didn't see coming. I got a call from a storage facility in Helena, about 2 hours from Bozeman. A manager there told me they had a unit registered to David's name, which had been flagged during a warrant search. I didn't know anything about it. David had never mentioned it. I drove up with 2 agents a few days later. The unit was mostly empty. Just a few boxes. An old suit. Some folders. But one thing stood out, a duffel bag filled with cash. Over $80,000, neatly bundled. There was also a notebook. Inside were pages of notes David had written. Phone numbers. Flight numbers. Names of companies. One name showed up again and again, Paul Avery. I recognized it. That was the name on the email exchange from the flash drive. I asked Steve if they'd found him. He paused, then said, "We're working on it." That pause told me everything. David had gotten too close. He'd figured it out. Not just about Mark, but about the people Mark was working with. And now that I had the same information, I was in danger too. I left Bozeman that weekend. Packed up Jake, told my parents I needed a break, and went to stay with my aunt in Idaho Falls. I didn't tell anyone else. Not even my closest friends. For the next few weeks, I lived in silence. No updates. No contact. Just me and my son, hiding while the feds moved in. And then, one day, Steve called. "Are you ready to end this?" he asked. I said yes. Steve didn't explain much on the phone. He just told me to come back to Bozeman by the end of the week. "We need you here when this breaks," he said. "They're finally ready to move." So I packed up Jake and came home. The day I returned, everything looked normal, but it felt different. My front yard, my porch, my street, it all felt tense, like something was waiting to happen. And it did. The next morning, the FBI raided Mark's condo. It was all over the news within the hour. Black SUVs, agents in jackets, boxes being carried out. Neighbors standing outside with their phones out, filming. Mark wasn't even home when they came. They found him in a cabin outside Whitefish, trying to destroy files and burn a laptop in a fire pit. It was too late. The files David had saved, the flash drive, the notebook, the cash, the fake documents, the video, all of it painted a clear picture. But it got worse. Because when they brought Mark in and started pressing, he broke. He flipped. And he gave up everyone. Paul Avery was real. So were the fake companies. There were 4 other men involved, all running scams in different parts of Montana and Wyoming, using shell businesses to steal retirement money from the elderly, reroute funds through fake charities, and bribe small-town officials for zoning contracts. It was a spiderweb of fraud, and David had accidentally uncovered the center of it. But they weren't just thieves. They were dangerous men. They'd used threats. Paid off lawyers. Buried lawsuits. And when David found out, they'd tried to scare him off. They failed. Mark admitted he knew they might hurt David, but he didn't stop them. That made him complicit. He cried in court. Begged for a deal. Claimed he only wanted to fix his debts. Claimed he never thought things would go that far. But the judge didn't buy it. Mark was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Paul Avery got 22 years. 2 of the others fled the state, 1 was caught, the other is still on the run. The 4th man, a former accountant named Harris, hung himself in his garage the night before his indictment. I watched the sentencing from the back of the courtroom. Mark didn't look at me once. Afterward, people in town started acting different around me. Some were embarrassed they'd ever believed Mark. Others were supportive, kind, even thankful. Apparently, some of the stolen money came from their parents' retirement funds. One woman hugged me outside the grocery store and sobbed into my jacket. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like I'd barely survived. Jake turned 1 a month later. We had cake in the living room. Just me, him, and my parents. I played David's favorite song while Jake smashed frosting into his hair. I laughed harder than I had in a year. And then the letter came. It wasn't from a court. It wasn't from Steve. It was from a private law firm in Helena. They'd been holding something for me, a sealed envelope and a deposit slip. From David. He'd set up one last account, years ago, in case anything ever happened. It wasn't in my name or his. It was under Jake's initials. He'd deposited $25,000 in it, and wrote a letter addressed to me and our son. I don't know how this ends. I don't know if this gets out of control. But I want you both to have something that can't be touched. Something safe. I'm sorry I couldn't finish this myself. But I know you, Rachel. You're stronger than you think. I trust you more than anyone. And if you're reading this, you did it. I love you. Always. David. I sat on my porch for hours that night, holding that letter, just whispering thank you over and over. That was the moment the weight finally lifted. That was when I knew he hadn't just left me clues. He'd left me a path. And I'd walked every painful step of it. Mark lost everything. His money, his freedom, his name. His wife left him. His kids don't speak to him. The town remembers him as the man who tried to destroy a grieving widow and ended up destroying himself. As for me, I rebuilt. I sold the house David and I had shared. It was too full of ghosts. I bought a smaller place across town, with a fenced yard and a swing set for Jake. I started a small bookkeeping business from home. Nothing flashy. But honest. Quiet. Steady. I tell people the truth now, even when it's hard. I don't let anyone push me around. And I listen to my gut. Always. Sometimes I still see Mark's name on local articles. Appeals denied. Transfers between prisons. Once, someone sent me a link to an interview where he tried to act like he'd been manipulated. I didn't watch it. He can tell whatever story he wants. Mine is already written. And when Jake is old enough, I'll sit him down, show him the letters, the videos, the documents, and the truth about his father, the man who saw the danger coming, who tried to protect us, and who trusted me to finish what he started. I'll tell him what David told me: don't let people like Mark win. Ever. And I didn't. I never will.